recognized for the Honorable Judge Harvey R. Sorkat.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Be seated. This trial will be conducted in two phases. The first phase will address the validity of the surrogacy contract and whether or not such a contract is enforceable. The second phase will address the issue of custody and what are the best interests of baby M. One decision will be handed down after both phases are over. You can open as you will, Mr. Skoloff.
Thank you. Your Honor, the issue to be decided in this courtroom is whether a promise to make a gift of life can be enforced. William and Elizabeth Stern had the American dream of a home and a family. But Mrs. Stern has a medical condition that prevents her from carrying a baby without significant risk to her health. In striving for their dream of a family, they found what they thought was the perfect solution: a surrogate mother. So 4 intelligent adults came together and agreed that Mary Beth Whitehead would carry a child of Bill Stern, a child of his own flesh and blood. And then she would return that child to Bill and Betsy. They would love and nurture that child as 100% their own. And not one of the 4 will testify that there was ever any question but that the child would be brought up and raised by the Sterns. Indeed, Mrs. Whitehead will testify that she first became involved as a surrogate with another couple for 8 months before she even met the Sterns. So that for a period of almost 2 years, she and Rick Whitehead knew and understood the concept.
When all the testimony is heard, and when every lawyer has spoken, what you're going to see is that the defendant in this case is motherhood. And the issue is whether money can buy anything in this society. We're here because Mary Beth Whitehead could not deny her motherhood, and because Mary Beth Whitehead stood up and said, no, there are some things money can't buy. You're going to see some very fundamental differences between the Sterns and the Whiteheads. The Sterns are educated, and they're good people. The Whiteheads are good people, but they're not educated people. Mary Beth did not graduate from high school. Her husband was fighting a war in Vietnam while the Sterns were in college. He doesn't have a formal education. The niceties of contracts might sometimes be lost on them. But what they do know are feelings. Feelings like those that Mary Beth had that made her think she could help somebody in such a profound way, which are the same feelings that ran so deeply in her that made it impossible for her to give up her child. Because no matter what somebody else says, no matter what's put on a piece of paper, no matter what the rhetoric, there's a child that grew within her. And as the child grew, the mother's love for the child grew, and the bond to the child grew with it. And even though people said a deal's a deal, you've got to go through with it. And even though money was out there as an inducement, she couldn't go through with it. It wasn't Betsy Stern's child. It was her child.
Your Honor, with all due respect to my colleagues, I believe that I represent the most important person in this case, a 9-month-old child who has come to be known as Baby M. She cannot speak, and I must speak for her. I say to all who come to this court today and in the days to come that we must focus on the needs and rights of this tiny, vulnerable human being. I cannot therefore argue that she should be stigmatized or deemed the product of an illegal agreement. She is the agreement. It gave her life. To argue against it would be to argue for the position that would make her an aberration, a freak, of public curiosity. Contracts govern relationships between people and allow us to live in society, to fulfill our expectations and to go about our lives securely. The terms of this contract are clear. While performance is painful, it is not impossible. In that light, Baby M's interests are best served by finding that birthright, this contract, is legitimate. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, counselors. Mr. Skoloff, your first witness.
I call as my first witness, Your Honor, the plaintiff, William Stern.
It was in December of 1979. Betsy woke up one morning and she had problems with her vision. I drove her to the ophthalmologist, and while he was examining her... no, actually, it was after he had performed the swinging lamp test. I noticed that she had tears streaming down her cheeks. Well, the doctor told her that she had Marcus Gunn pupil. And she asked him whether or not she had multiple sclerosis. And the doctor looked down at the floor and he wouldn't look at her, and he asked her whether or not she had any other symptoms, and she said yes.
Then what happened?
Well, we looked into the medical literature, and we discovered that between 20 and 40% of all women with multiple sclerosis will suffer an exacerbation of their disease after the birth of a baby.
Mr. Stern, did you ever tell Mrs. Whitehead that your wife was not infertile?
No, I told her it was a risk to Betsy's health, that it could be dangerous.
Unbelievable.
What was it that appealed to you about surrogate parenting?
It was important to me and to Bill because he had lost all his relatives except his parents in the Holocaust. After they died, he had no relatives. And I liked knowing that one of us would have a genetic link to our child. I also liked that there was this woman coming voluntarily to be artificially inseminated by my husband, who would give up the child to my husband and allow me to legally adopt.
Now, at any point prior to or during the pregnancy, did Mrs. Whitehead tell you that she would not give up the child?
On the contrary. In fact, at our first meeting, she had said she wasn't going to show up on our doorstep. She was anxious to do this. And Rick said, "I'll kill you if you keep this baby."
Are there risks to a fetus as a woman gets older?
Yes, there are risks to the fetus.
Were you ever concerned about any risks to you due to your age, 36?
I was willing to accept all risks other than my multiple sclerosis.
Did you know there are 100 risks?
There are probably more than 100. I don't know how many there are.
And all of them were willing to assume...
I just said that. I was willing to accept all risks, either to myself or to the fetus.